The cold steel of the rifle gleamed under the stark lighting of the testing range. Major General Harlan stepped forward, his boots echoing against the metal floor as he hefted the weapon in his hands. Primitive, yes, very primitive, he said to himself, but still ours. Around him, a handful of Earth's top military officers stood silently, their expressions a mix of pride and wariness. Today was not just a demonstration. It was a matter of dignity. Opposite them stood a young alien cadet from the Casterian fleet, tall and slender, with luminous green skin and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Cadet Xerax exuded an air of confidence, no arrogance. The corners of his thin lips curled upward as he observed the human weapons with a mocking gaze. His species, the Casterians, had long since surpassed projectile-based arms in favor of sleek, energy-driven weaponry that could disintegrate targets without a trace. To him, these crude metal devices held by the humans were little more than relics. "This," Xerax said, the words slipping from his lips like a sneer, "this is what your kind still relies on. Solid projectiles, kinetic energy, how quaint. It's no wonder you've stayed confined to this planet." The room tensed. Colonel Graves, standing nearest to Xerax, clenched his jaw but kept silent. The Casterians were allies, at least for now, and political necessity demanded a level of tolerance toward their condescension. Still, the mockery stung. General Harlan met Xerax's eyes, his face hard but composed. "We may not have plasma rifles or nanite swarms, Cadet," he said, his voice steady, "but what we have works. It's kept us alive through wars and crises you couldn't begin to imagine." Xerax chuckled, the sound oddly melodic in the room full of hard-edged human soldiers. "Kept you alive? More like kept you from evolving. Survival is the lowest bar a species can reach, General. Thriving, expanding, that's the true mark of superiority. And from where I stand, your species still has a long way to go." Harlan's grip tightened on the rifle. He could feel the weight of his soldiers' eyes on him, waiting for his response. They had been through more than this young alien could fathom. Civil wars, planetary conflicts, interstellar skirmishes. The Casterians might be more advanced, but humans were survivors, and that counted for something. Instead of snapping back, Harlan took a breath and gestured to the testing range ahead. "Let's put that theory to the test, shall we?" he said, his voice calm but with an edge of challenge. "We've set up a demonstration for you. You show us what your weapons can do, and we'll show you what ours can." Xerax's smirk widened, his posture relaxing, as though this was nothing more than an amusing game. "Very well, General, but don't be surprised when your soldiers leave here feeling inadequate." The Casterian cadet moved with an elegant fluidity, summoning a sleek, chrome weapon from the holster on his hip. It hummed with an almost inaudible frequency, emitting a soft blue light. "This is what real military technology looks like," he said, holding it up for the humans to see. "No combustion, no recoil, no messy cleanup. Just pure precision and efficiency." As Xerax prepared to fire, the humans watched in silence. The alien aimed at one of the test dummies set up in the distance. With a flick of his slender fingers, the weapon discharged a thin beam of light, almost too fast to see. The target didn't explode or crumble. It simply vanished, reduced to molecules in a fraction of a second. There was a brief moment of silence. Even the humans couldn't help but be impressed by the flawless execution. Colonel Graves raised an eyebrow, and a few murmurs rippled through the group. Harlan, however, remained stoic. "That's one way to do it," Harlan said, unimpressed on the surface, though the reality of Casterian technology wasn't lost on him. "But efficiency isn't everything, Cadet. War isn't just about the perfect shot. It's about adaptability, about using what's available when the situation is anything but perfect." Xerax shrugged. "If your technology was more advanced, General, you wouldn't need to adapt. You'd simply win." The casual arrogance in Xerax's tone gnawed at Harlan's patience. Still, he held his ground, knowing this was more than just a demonstration. It was about respect, something the Casterian cadets sorely lacked. Let's see how our primitive weapons fare then, Harlan said, signaling to his men. 2 soldiers stepped forward, rolling a heavy piece of artillery into position. It was Earth's pride, a high-caliber railgun, still based on kinetic energy, but refined over decades of military innovation. Though it lacked the elegance of the Casterian energy weapons, it was a force to be reckoned with. Zirax watched with barely concealed amusement. "I'm sure this will be enlightening," he said, folding his arms. The soldiers aimed the railgun, the soft hum of charging coils filling the air. Harlan stepped back, allowing the moment to build. Without warning, the railgun fired. A deafening boom reverberated through the chamber. The projectile tore through the air, a streak of metal propelled at unimaginable speeds. The alien cadet's eyes widened as the projectile struck its target. Unlike his neat, clean shot, the railgun's impact was pure destruction. The test dummy didn't just disintegrate. The shockwave from the blast tore apart everything around it. Debris scattered, and the sheer force of the weapon sent tremors through the ground. When the dust settled, there was nothing left of the target zone but a smoldering crater. Harlan glanced at Zirax, whose smug expression had faded into something resembling astonishment. "Primitive, maybe," Harlan said with a thin smile, "but it gets the job done." Zirax stared at the smoking ruin, his confidence visibly shaken. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed uncertain. The humans, though technologically behind, had just shown him something he hadn't expected. Raw, unbridled power. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of a new understanding. The air in the testing range hung heavy with the lingering echoes of the railgun's blast. Cadet Zirax stood motionless, his glowing eyes locked on the crater left by the human weapon. For the first time, the smugness had drained from his expression, replaced by something close to disbelief. He wasn't used to surprises. Not from a species as backward as humans, anyway. "You see," General Harlan said, stepping closer to the alien cadet, "our technology might not look impressive by your standards, but war isn't fought in laboratories or simulations. It's fought in the mud, in the chaos, where brute force and adaptability count for more than elegance." Zirax didn't respond immediately. His elongated fingers brushed the surface of his energy weapon, almost absent-mindedly, as though its presence reassured him. He blinked, recalibrating. "Impressive," he finally admitted, his voice quieter than before. "For something so primitive." Colonel Graves raised an eyebrow at the reluctant compliment, but said nothing. He, too, knew this demonstration wasn't just about showing off weaponry. It was about respect. The Casterians, for all their technological superiority, had never experienced the kind of dirty, drawn-out conflicts humanity had endured. It was one thing to destroy a target in a controlled environment, another to win on a battlefield where nothing went as planned. Zirax, still visibly shaken, straightened and refocused. His pride hadn't entirely crumbled, but a crack had formed. "Precision, however, is still what wins wars," he said, regaining some of his earlier arrogance. He gestured towards the far side of the range, where a series of smaller, more agile targets had been set up. "I'll demonstrate again," Zirax continued. "Let's see how well your crude weapons handle something that requires accuracy rather than brute force." The human officers exchanged glances. Zirax was trying to regain control of the situation, but Harlan wasn't about to let him dictate the terms. He gave a nod to Sergeant Miller, one of his top marksmen. The tall, sharp-eyed soldier stepped forward, cradling a sleek sniper rifle, another projectile-based weapon, but refined in near perfection through years of battlefield experience. "We're not strangers to precision," Harlan said, folding his arms. "Sergeant Miller, show our guest how we handle moving targets." Zirax watched, intrigued but skeptical, as Miller adjusted his rifle and sighted downrange. The targets, now active, zipped unpredictably from side to side, their erratic motions designed to mimic evasive maneuvers in combat. Zirax's smirk returned, as if daring the human to succeed. Miller's breathing slowed, his body still as a statue. In an instant, he squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, and a target shattered mid-movement, cleanly hit with a single shot. Another breath, another shot, another shattered target. Within seconds, all of the moving targets had been destroyed with flawless precision. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the human officers, but they quickly fell silent, watching Zirax's reaction. The cadet's glowing eyes narrowed as he studied Miller. For the first time, he looked less like a condescending visitor and more like a curious student. "That's impossible," Zirax muttered, his earlier confidence wavering again. "Your technology can't." "It's not just the technology," Harlan interrupted. "It's the operator. It's training, experience, and instinct. Our weapons may seem outdated to you, but we've honed them to work in the real world, in real conflicts. The kind you might not be ready for." Zirax's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't need chaos. Our systems are perfect. Perfect systems mean perfect results. Until they aren't," Colonel Graves said, his voice firm. "The battlefield doesn't care how advanced your weapons are when the unexpected happens. You have no idea what real unpredictability feels like, do you?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Zirax's glowing gaze flickered. For all his bravado, he knew there was truth to what the humans were saying. His people had never faced a truly existential threat in millennia. Their wars were fought with cold efficiency, where the victor was decided before the first shot was even fired. Earth was different, messy, chaotic, full of contradictions. Yet here they stood, resilient. "The lesson here," General Harlan continued, "isn't just about power. It's about how you use it and when. Our weapons work because we understand the value of adaptability. We're not afraid to get our hands dirty." Zirax's gaze lingered on the shattered remains of the targets, a flicker of unease dancing across his features. His mind raced, calculating. He wasn't stupid. His arrogance came from a place of certainty, born of a civilization that had long considered itself unchallenged. But now, here, in this moment, he was confronted with the unsettling reality that maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't as backward as he had assumed. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat outright. "Perhaps," Zirax said, his voice more measured now, "there is something to be said for resilience. But don't mistake brute force for superiority, General. Precision is still the key." "Precision has its place," Harlan agreed, surprising Zirax. "But so does raw power, and so does chaos. Wars are rarely won by those who expect everything to go according to plan." Zirax's jaw tightened. His species valued order, control, and perfection. The notion that chaos, something they had eliminated from their own society, could be a weapon was an alien concept in more ways than one. Harlan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You've seen what our weapons can do, Cadet, but you've only scratched the surface of what we're capable of. Don't let your assumptions blind you to the reality that we've faced destruction time and again, and we've always come out the other side." The words hit home, and Zirax, for all his training and superiority, felt the weight of them. Humans were survivors in ways he had never considered. It wasn't just their weapons that made them dangerous. It was their will to endure, to adapt, to thrive in the face of adversity. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying weapon of all. Zirax stood in silence, his arrogance chipped away piece by piece, the revelation settling in. He wasn't facing a technologically inferior species. He was facing something far more unpredictable, something dangerous. As the tension simmered, the alien cadet straightened, his face unreadable. "I see," he said quietly, the faintest edge of respect creeping into his voice. "Perhaps there is more to your species than I anticipated." General Harlan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps there is." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken implications. The test had revealed more than either side had expected, but the true test, of respect, of understanding of the future, was only beginning. The air in the testing chamber was still, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Cadet Zirax's luminous eyes had dimmed slightly, no longer burning with the smug confidence that had dominated his demeanor earlier. He stood silently, processing the revelation that the humans, These seemingly primitive creatures had demonstrated something far more powerful than just weaponry. They had shown the strength of unpredictability, the potency of survival honed over millennia of conflict. General Harlan approached the alien cadet slowly, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. "We didn't expect you to understand us right away," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your people have had the luxury of avoiding the kind of struggles we've faced. You've evolved in a straight line. We've had to zigzag through chaos, war, famine, and failure to get to where we are. And we're still here." Zirax's elongated fingers tightened around his energy weapon, not out of fear, but as a reflexive response to the uncomfortable truth Harlan had just laid out. The Casterians had never known such chaos. Their wars were clinical, decided by logic and precision, their battles won before they ever began. But the humans were different, unpredictable, rough around the edges, but dangerous precisely because of that. The unpredictability, Zirax said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "That's the real weapon, isn't it?" Harlan's lips curved into a faint smile. "You're catching on. It's not just about brute force or precision. It's about adaptability, knowing when to fight, when to flee, and when to use whatever's at hand, even if it's not perfect. Especially if it's not perfect." Zirax turned away from the crater that still smoldered on the testing range, his thoughts churning. His mind, trained to analyze and evaluate, was struggling to reconcile the raw power he had just witnessed with the neat, ordered world he had known. The Casterians had always prided themselves on their control, their efficiency. But here in this chamber, he had glimpsed something they lacked: resilience born from chaos. "We've never needed to adapt like that," Zirax admitted, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "We've never had to face destruction the way your people have. Everything we've built, everything we've fought for, has been planned, calculated. We've never needed desperation." "That's the difference," Colonel Graves interjected, stepping forward. "Desperation can be a powerful teacher. You don't realize what you're capable of until you have no other choice." Zirax regarded Graves for a long moment, the alien's expression shifting from one of bemusement to contemplation. Desperation was a foreign concept to the Casterians. Their technological supremacy had insulated them from the kinds of existential threats humanity had endured. For the first time, Zirax understood why these humans, despite their outdated technology, had earned their place in the galaxy. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving against impossible odds. "You said earlier that war isn't fought in laboratories," Zirax said, turning back to Harlan. "That it's fought in chaos, where nothing goes as planned." "I see that now." Harlan nodded but said nothing, letting Zirax come to his own conclusions. The tension in the room had shifted, no longer the battle of egos and superiority it had been at the start. Now it was a moment of mutual understanding, the first flicker of respect between two species that had seen each other as less than equals only hours ago. Zirax inhaled deeply, his glowing eyes flickering with a new intensity. Not the arrogance of before, but something more grounded. "You've given me much to think about, General. Perhaps we've been too quick to judge your kind." "We're not asking for your approval, Cadet," Harlan replied, his tone steady. "We're asking for your understanding. If you see us as equals or at least something close to it, then that's enough for now." A silence fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of unspoken agreements, of lines being crossed, of grudges being put to rest. Zirax, for all his initial arrogance, was learning what it meant to be humble in the face of unexpected power. And Harlan, ever the soldier, knew that today's victory wasn't about proving human superiority, but about proving that they weren't to be underestimated. "You've shown me that we still have much to learn," Zirax admitted quietly. "Your people are more dangerous than we realize, precisely because of your imperfections." Graves let out a low chuckle. "Well, don't go spreading that around. We like to keep a few cards up our sleeves." Zirax didn't laugh, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The tension between the two species, once so thick with disdain, had begun to ease. The cadet straightened, his glowing eyes now calm, no longer searching for flaws, but instead seeking to understand. "I'll be reporting back to my superiors," Zirax said, his voice once again composed but now lacking the condescension. "I think they'll find my assessment of Earth enlightening." General Harlan gave a small nod, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And what will your report say?" "Exactly." Zirax paused, considering his answer carefully. "That the humans are more resilient than we anticipated, that their methods are unconventional but effective, and that they may not be as primitive as we once believed." A slow grin spread across Harlan's face. "I suppose that's a start." Zirax looked around the chamber one last time, taking in the soldiers, the weapons, the smoldering crater left behind by the railgun. There was no doubt in his mind now. The humans were not to be underestimated. They were dangerous, but not in the way the Castarians had assumed. It wasn't their technology that made them formidable. It was their spirit, their unpredictability, their refusal to surrender even when the odds were stacked against them. As Zirax turned to leave, Harlan called out after him, "Cadet." Zirax stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "Remember this," Harlan said, his tone carrying a final note of warning. "If you ever come to fight us, don't expect it to go the way you think." For a moment, Zirax held his gaze, understanding fully the weight of those words. Then, with a respectful nod, he left the chamber, the door hissing shut behind him. The humans watched him go, a collective exhale of relief filling the space. The test was over, but the implications would linger long after. General Harlan stood in silence, eyes fixed on the door. "I think we just earned ourselves a little more time," he said quietly. Graves chuckled again, his voice carrying the weight of countless battles. "Or a whole lot more trouble." Harlan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Either way, we'll be ready."